Hello, this is Mayfield. Thank you for tuning into the broadcast today. One of the most interesting stories in the entire Bible is that about Ishmael. In Genesis 15:1, the Lord appears to Abraham in a vision and tells Abraham, "Do not be afraid. Abram, I am your shield and your exceedingly great reward." And then Abraham asked God a question. And in verse number 2, "What will you give me seeing I go childless?" And he goes on to say, "Look, you have given me no offspring." And God tells him his heir would come from his own body, not Eleazar, which was his servant. Then God tells him to look toward heaven and count the stars, and you'll be able to number them, if you're able to number them. And God went on to say, "So shall your descendants be." A wonderful promise of God that God was going to bless Abraham and give him many children. Abraham was 85 years old at this time, and Sarah was 75. Then they tried to take things into their own hands. I don't know why it is that people of God today, somehow we try to get ahead of God sometimes. We stand up on God's promises, and sometimes it takes us several years that God will answer a prayer and hear our prayer. So we have to keep that in mind, that it went on quite a period of time. And so Sarah suggested to Abraham that they use her Egyptian maidservant to have Abraham a child. When she was with child, Sarah despised Hagar, and there was a lot of contention going on in that family there. And finally, Abraham said, "Rather choose between me and her." So Hagar fled from Sarah and Abraham. There was so much contention that she felt like she needed to leave. But God convinced her to eventually return. Remember that Hagar was an Egyptian and Sarah was a Jew, and God wanted his heir to come from Abraham and Sarah. And the angel of the Lord found her and said, "Behold, you're with child, and you shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael. Because the Lord has heard your afflictions, he shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every hand against man against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all of his brethren." Ishmael are descendants of the Arab people today. Very few people of the Old Testament would have survived to our own day. For example, all the 10 nations of chapter 15, verses 19 through 21, have ceased to exist. But 2 people have survived, and that have been the Jewish people, descendants of Isaac, and the Arabs that have been descendants of Ishmael in Genesis chapter 17, verses 19 through 22. Ishmael was 19 years old when they eventually left Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham asked God to bless Ishmael and to help him. And Ishmael did have 12 sons in Genesis 25, and they have survived all these years. There's been a lot of strife between the Israelites and the Arabs today. There's just been a lot of difficulty, and it goes on further in the Word of God. I'll be talking a little bit later about Esau, Jacob and Esau, how there were 2 nations when the twins were born to them. Be talking about them a little bit later. But let us thank God today that God will keep his promise, and God give him an heir. God's heir was Isaac, and we serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So let us remember that the promised heir was Isaac. It was not Ishmael, as some have erroneously taught. And we thank God today for his blessings, and thank you for listening to the program today.